Here's something nobody tells you about surgery. It's not the scalpel that cuts deepest. It's what you come home to. I'm Warren Cole, retired, 63 years old, and until 8 days ago, I thought the most dangerous thing I'd ever face was a blocked artery and a surgeon with cold hands. I was wrong. Dead wrong. Because the real attack didn't happen in an operating room. It happened on my own front porch, with my own daughter watching, and a man I never trusted standing in my doorway wearing a smile that said, "I already won." He hadn't. But we'll get to that. Welcome back to Sweet Family Revenge. Grab your snacks, get comfortable, and remember, the people in these stories had every chance to behave themselves. They just chose wrong. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. You're going to love it here. Let me back up. Diane, my wife, my compass. The only person who ever truly understood how my mind worked. Passed 4 years ago. Breast cancer. Fast and merciless. The way it always is with the good ones. She left behind a house full of memories, a daughter who looked exactly like her, and a husband who didn't know what to do with quiet. So, I filled the quiet with work. I spent 31 years in land acquisition consulting. Unglamorous title. Extraordinary implications. What that means in plain English is this: companies, developers, and occasionally governments hired me to find land before it became valuable, before the highways came, before the rezoning, before the press releases. I was the man in the room before the room existed. I was good at it, very good. And then I had a heart attack at my desk on a Thursday afternoon. And my cardiologist, a brilliant, humorless man named Dr. Elias Park, who communicated almost entirely in sighs, looked me dead in the eyes and said, "Warren, your body is filing a formal complaint. I suggest you listen." So, I retired, sold my consultancy, and made one financial decision in the quiet of my own mind that I told absolutely nobody about. Not even Sabrina. Now, Sabrina, my daughter, she has her mother's eyes, and unfortunately her father's taste in believing the best in people. She met Sawyer Scott at a fundraising gala 3 years ago, the kind of event where everyone's dressed expensively and nobody's actually rich, except the 3 people in the corner who don't need to prove it. Sawyer was charming, I'll give him that. He had the handshake of a senator and the smile of a man who'd practiced it in a mirror. He laughed at the right moments, asked thoughtful questions, and looked at Sabrina like she was the only woman in the room. I watched him all evening and I thought, this man wants something. I said nothing because Sabrina was happy. And after 4 years of watching my daughter grieve her mother while quietly grieving myself, I was not about to throw a grenade into the first you'll smile I'd seen on her face. But I watched. I always watch. They married 14 months later. Small ceremony. Beautiful. Diane would have cried through the whole thing. I held it together until the father-daughter dance, and then I did not hold it together at all. And we will not be discussing that further. Sawyer moved into my house, our house, 6 months after the wedding. Just temporarily, Sabrina said, while they find something permanent. I nodded, said nothing. That was 18 months ago. Now, here's where I need you to pay attention. About 2 years before my heart attack, I was still working on a quiet consulting side project, a county in rural Georgia, Harlan County, barely on any map, with a population of about 11,000, a courthouse that looked like it was built by hand, and land so flat and overlooked, it practically apologized for existing. I found something, buried in federal infrastructure documents that most people wouldn't read because they were written in the specific dialect of English designed to make human beings fall asleep. I found a proposal, a federal highway expansion, a logistics corridor that, if approved, would cut directly through Harland County and transform 40 square miles of forgotten farmland into one of the most strategically valuable freight corridors on the eastern seaboard. I bought land in Harland County quietly through a trust in a name that wasn't mine. And then I had a heart attack, retired, and told nobody. Not a soul. So surgery. My cardiologist had been after me for months about a valve that needed replacing. Not optional, he said. Necessary. I scheduled it. Told Sabrina. She fussed appropriately. Sawyer nodded and said all the right things. The surgery went well. 6 hours. I woke up feeling like I'd been reassembled by someone working from a diagram. I spent 5 days in recovery. Then 2 more at my sister's place in Marietta, because she insisted. And when Margaret Cole insists, continents move. What I did not know, what I could not have known, was what was happening at my house while I was gone. I found out later through a conversation with Sabrina that took 3 hours and cost 2 boxes of tissues exactly how it had unfolded. Sawyer had started working on her the night I went into surgery. Not the next day. Not after I was stable. The night of. He had sat across from Sabrina in that hospital waiting room while I was still on the table, and he had taken her hand very gently and said, "Sabrina, we need to think about what happens if your father doesn't come through this the way we hope. I know it's hard, but we need to be practical. We need to be ready." She had told him it was too soon to think about that. He had nodded, said she was right. Let it go. And then he came back to it the next day, and the day after that. Each time, slightly differently. Each time, slightly further along the road, he was building in her mind. By day 4, he was talking about the transition. By day 6, he was talking about what your father would have wanted. By day 7, the day before I came home, he placed a single document on the kitchen table in front of her and said, "This just protects us. Sabrina, it protects you. Sign it, and we never have to worry about it again." She told me later she knew something was wrong the moment the pen left the paper. She said she sat at that kitchen table for a long time after Sawyer left the room looking at her own signature, with a feeling she couldn't name pressing against the inside of her chest. But Sawyer had taken 8 days of a frightened daughter sitting alone in a hospital waiting room and turned that fear into a decision she couldn't undo. That is who Sawyer Scott was. That is what I came home to. On day 8, I came home. I took a cab. Didn't tell anyone the exact time. I just wanted to walk into my own house, sit in Diane's chair by the window, and drink coffee in the silence I'd earned. I walked up my porch steps. I put my key in the lock. It didn't turn. Now, listen. When your key doesn't work in your own front door after surgery, your first thought isn't betrayal. Your first thought is, did I grab the wrong keys? So, I checked. No, these were my keys. Same ring. Same worn edge on the house key where I dropped it on concrete once in 2014. I tried again. Nothing. And then the door opened from the inside. Sawyer stood there, dressed like he'd been expecting me. Pressed shirt. That smile. That practiced, polished, senatorial smile. He looked at me the way a man looks at something he's already decided is no longer relevant. He said, "Warren, you're looking better than expected. We weren't sure when you'd be back." I said. He stepped aside slightly. Sabrina was behind him, near the stairs. She wouldn't meet my eyes. I said, "Sabrina, what's going on?" She said quietly, like she'd rehearsed it, and still hated every word. "Dad, Sawyer, and I have been talking about the arrangement about the house." "The house?" I repeated. Sawyer's smile didn't move. He said, "We've had some papers drawn up. Given your health situation, it makes sense for us to formally take over the property. We're already living here. We're the ones maintaining it." I looked at him, Amos. You changed my locks, I said. He shrugged, just barely. The kind of shrug designed to make you feel like you're overreacting. We updated the security. It's still your home. Warren, we just want things to be more structured. More structured? I had just had open heart surgery. I was standing on my own porch with a bag in my hand, and my son-in-law had changed my locks and dressed it up in the language of structure. I felt something move through me then. Not anger. Not yet. Something quieter than anger and far more dangerous. Clarity. I looked at Sawyer Scott, his pressed shirt, his practiced smile, his absolute certainty that he had already won. And I said very calmly, very quietly, "You picked the wrong man." Sawyer. The smile didn't disappear all at once. It flickered first like a light with a bad connection, and then it was gone. He said, "Excuse me," I said. "You heard me." And then I picked up my bag, walked past both of them into my own house, went to Diane's chair by the window, and sat down. My hands were completely steady, because here's what Sawyer Scott didn't know. He had spent months researching me, my assets, my retirement, my property. He thought he knew exactly what he was taking. He had no idea what was sitting in Harlan County, Georgia, and in about 72 hours, he was going to find out why the wrong man is the most dangerous kind. If you've made it this far, do us one quick favor. Subscribe. A lot of people watch without ever doing it, but it costs you nothing and means everything to us. Thank you. Genuinely. There's a particular kind of silence that isn't peaceful. It's the kind that has teeth. I sat in Diane's chair and let that silence fill the room. Sawyer was still standing near the doorway. Sabrina was on the third stair, suspended like she couldn't decide which direction was safe. Neither of them spoke. Good. I needed them off balance. I looked out the window at the oak tree in the front yard. Diane planted that tree 22 years ago from a sapling she bought at a farmer's market for $3. She carried it home in her lap because it was too tall for the trunk. That tree was now 40 feet high. Some things just need time and the right conditions to become what they were always going to be. Sawyer cleared his throat. His first mistake. Clearing your throat in a silence you're supposed to own tells me you don't actually own it, he said. Warren, I know this feels abrupt, but we really do think this is the best arrangement given everything, I said. Sit down. Sawyer, you heard me. Sit down. He sat. Slowly, like sitting was a concession he was making voluntarily, which we both knew it wasn't. Sabrina came off the stairs and sat on the couch, her hands folded in her lap. She looked like a woman attending a meeting she'd tried to cancel. I looked at my daughter for a long moment. She finally met my eyes. And what I saw there wasn't cruelty. It was conflict, which told me Sawyer had worked on her carefully. The way you don't notice a tide going out until you're already standing in shallow water, I said. Sabrina, how long has he been planning this? She opened her mouth. Sawyer spoke first. This isn't about planning. Warren, this is about practicality. You had major surgery. You're 63. The house is paid off. But the upkeep, the taxes. Sabrina and I are managing all of that now, I said without looking at him. I wasn't talking to you. The temperature in the room dropped 15 degrees. Sabrina said quietly, Sawyer thought it would be better to have everything organized before you got back, so there wouldn't be any confusion. Confusion, I said. Right. I leaned back, let another silence breathe. Then I said, Sawyer, what do you know about Harlan County? Nothing, not a flicker, not a twitch, which was interesting, because an innocent man would have said. Where? Let me explain something about liars, not the amateur ones. Those are easy. I mean the professional ones. The ones who've been performing a version of themselves for so long, they've almost forgotten there's a performance happening. Sawyer Scott was that kind of liar. But even professionals have tells. His was stillness. Most people, when they don't know something, move. A head tilt, a small frown, some physical punctuation of confusion. Sawyer went completely still, like a man who'd been asked a question he'd already rehearsed an answer to. He said, after exactly one beat too many. "Can't say I do, should I?" I smiled. "Probably not," I said. "Just an old work thing." And I let it go. For now. That evening, after Sabrina had gone upstairs and Sawyer had retreated to what used to be my study, I made 2 phone calls. The first was Theodore Basque. Theodore was not a warm man. He communicated in complete sentences and charged accordingly. I'd used him for 30 years. He picked up on the second ring. "Theodore, it's Warren. I heard you had surgery." I did. "Theodore, I need you to pull everything connected to the Harlan County Trust, and I need to know if anyone has been making inquiries." "What kind of inquiries?" "The kind someone makes when they think they've found something they're not supposed to have found," he said. "I'll call you in the morning," I said. "Make it early." The second call was Frank Aldridge. Frank was the kind of man who made Sawyer Scotts nervous without trying. 68 years old, a mind that filed everything, and the only person alive besides Theodore who knew about Harlan County. He picked up on the 4th ring. He'd seen my name and let me wait out of principle. "You're supposed to be recovering." "I am. I'm recovering with a problem." "How big?" "My son-in-law changed my locks while I was in the hospital." Silence. Then, "Say that again." I said it again. Frank said, "Does he know about the land?" He went still when I mentioned Harlan County. "That's not a coincidence." "No," I said. "It's not." I hung up, sat in the dark, and for the first time since I came home to a changed lock in my son-in-law's smile, I felt something close to settled. Not because the problem was solved, because the board was set. Theodore called at 7:14 the next morning. "Someone ran a title search on the Harlan County parcels 8 months ago, routed through a real estate research firm in Atlanta. Meridian Land Research. Never heard of them." "You wouldn't have." "They do quiet work for people who don't want their names on it. I pulled their client filings." A pause. "Warren. They were hired by an LLC shell company registered in Delaware. It took me until midnight to unravel it. Theodore. The LLC traces back to a personal holding company registered to a Sawyer A. Scott." I sat down. Not because I was shocked. I'd suspected. But there is a difference between suspecting and knowing has a weight that suspicion never does. How long was he researching before the marriage? Based on filing dates. 11 months before the wedding. 11 months before the wedding. He hadn't fallen in love with my daughter at a gala. He'd fallen in love with what he thought I was sitting on. Sabrina was the corridor, the access point, the key. And the cruelest part of that metaphor is that he'd now literally changed the locks. "Theodore, what is the Harlan County land worth today?" "At current projections, accounting for the infrastructure corridor announcement expected next quarter, conservatively 11 million, realistically closer to 17. I said nothing. "Warren, he didn't know about the trust structure, did he?" "So he married Sabrina thinking that when I died, or when he pushed me out, the land would surface in my estate and pass to her, and therefore to him." Theodore was quiet for a moment. Then he said something I'd never heard Theodore Basque say in 30 years. "Good Lord, get me a meeting. You, me, Frank, today." "Warren, what are you going to do?" I looked at the oak tree out the window, the one that took 22 years to become what it was always going to be. I said, what I always do. Theodore, finish what I started before anyone knew I'd begun. Upstairs, I could hear Sawyer moving around in my study, comfortable, settled, certain, completely unaware that the man sitting quietly in the chair downstairs had confirmed every suspicion, located every document, and was now 3 moves ahead of him on a board Sawyer didn't even know he was playing on. If you've been listening for a while and want stories like this to keep coming, it really helps if you hit that like button and subscribe. 97% of people never do, but it's what keeps this whole thing running. So, thank you for real. The next morning, I came downstairs to find Sawyer at my kitchen table eating eggs he'd made in my skillet, reading his phone with the casual comfort of a man who believed the house had already changed hands in every way that mattered. He looked up. "Morning. Warren. There's coffee," I said. "I know where the coffee is. Sawyer. I bought the machine." He smiled, chose to absorb that as a joke, smart enough to understand the piece was already over. I poured my coffee, sat across from him. Let the silence do its work. Then I said, "Tell me something. When did you first hear about Harlan County?" The fork paused, just barely. He said, "You mentioned it last night. I told you I don't know anything about it." I nodded slowly. "Right. You did say that." I sipped my coffee. He went back to his eggs. I said, "Meridian Land Research. Ring any bells?" This time the fork stopped completely, and Sawyer Scott made the mistake of looking up at me before he'd arranged his face properly. I saw it, just for a fraction of a second. Raw and unfiltered. Fear. He recovered fast. "I'm not sure what you're referring to," I said. "Sure you are." I stood up, rinsed my mug, and said without turning around, "Get Sabrina. The 3 of us are going to have a conversation that's long overdue." Then Sabrina came downstairs in her robe, confused, hair uncombed. She looked younger than her 31 years. She looked like the little girl who used to bring me drawings of houses and horses, and ask me which one I liked better. I always said both. I sat them on the couch, stood in front of them. "I want you to understand, I didn't do this with anger. I did it with the controlled precision of a man who holds every card and is simply deciding the order in which to lay them down." I said, "Sabrina, I love you. Everything I'm about to say comes from that. Are you ready?" She looked frightened. "Dad, what's going on?" "Ask your husband when he first hired Meridian Land Research to investigate my assets." She turned to Sawyer slowly. Sawyer said, "Warren, this is completely, I have the filing dates. I have the LLC registration. I have the title search requests on the Harlan County parcels." Theodore Basque spent the night pulling thread. "Sawyer, and you are completely unraveled," Sabrina said barely above a whisper. "Sawyer, what is he talking about?" Sawyer shifted. The smile was gone. What replaced it was the expression of a man rapidly calculating which lie still had legs. He said, "Sabrina, your father is a sick man who just had surgery, and he's don't." I said, "One word, in a register I don't use often, the kind that doesn't invite a response." Sawyer closed his mouth. I looked at my daughter. "He found a reference to land I own in Harlan County. He researched it before he ever proposed to you. He believed that when I died, the land would pass through my estate to you, and therefore to him." Sabrina stared at me, then turned to Sawyer. "Tell me that's not true." Sawyer said nothing. That nothing was the loudest thing I'd ever heard in that house. Then Wires did what cornered men always do when the first lie fails. He looked for a different door. "Warren, Think about this practically. You're 63. You just had heart surgery. Whatever that land is worth, it's going to be Sabrina's eventually anyway. All I did was try to understand what our future looked like. That's not a crime. That's planning. Planning, I said. Yes. You planned 11 months before the proposal. You planned through the wedding. You planned through 18 months of living in my house, eating my food. And then you planned through 8 days of your father-in-law on an operating table. I paused. That's not planning. Sawyer, that's a campaign. He opened his mouth one final time. The land is in a trust, I said quietly. Structured entirely outside my estate. Your name appears nowhere near it. Your LLC found the land. It never found the owner. And every document you had Sabrina sign last week, Theodore reviewed this morning. Void. Every single one. You have no legal authority to execute any of it. The last door closed. I could see it close behind his eyes. Sawyer Scott sat back on that couch with the practice smile gone, the angles exhausted, the performance finally over, and looked exactly like what he was, a man who had built an elaborate structure on a foundation that was never there. I gave Sabrina 20 minutes alone. She asked me to take Sawyer with me. I took him to the kitchen. He sat at the table, eggs cold in front of him, and said nothing. There was nothing left to say. The locksmith came at 11:17. I watched from Diane's chair as my original locks were restored. Sawyer stood near the door, silent, diminished, looking like a man wearing a suit 3 sizes too large for who he actually was. Theodore received the signed relinquishment at 249 peso. Tja, he texted me one word. Done. 3 days after Sawyer signed that document, the federal infrastructure announcement dropped. Official. Complete with corridor maps and county impact assessments. Harlan County was named specifically. My phone rang 14 times that day. I let Theodore handle every call. The final number he put in front of me 9 days later was $19.4 million. I sat with that number for a long moment. Then I did what I had always planned to do. I restructured the trust. Irrevocable. Ironclad. Sawyer Scott proof in every legal sense. The primary beneficiary was Sabrina, in her name alone. Structured so that no spouse, current or future, could touch the principal without her sole authorization. It was always going to be hers. It just needed to be protected first. Sabrina filed for divorce 6 weeks later. She came to me the evening before she filed and sat in the chair across from Diane's chair and was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Did you always know about him?" I suspected from the beginning. I didn't know until Theodore confirmed it. "Why didn't you say something before the wedding?" I looked at Diane's eyes and my daughter's face. "Because you were happy. My job was never to live your life. Sabrina. It was to make sure that when your life got hard, you had something solid to stand on." She was quiet. Then, $19 million is pretty solid. Your mother would have said that's not the solid part. What's the solid part? You found out who he was before you built a life around who he pretended to be. The money is just the floor. She cried. I let her. Just sat with her the way Diane used to sit with me. Sawyer Scott left the state 4 months later. Frank came over on a Thursday in late October. Bourbon. The oak tree turning amber in the evening light. Frank raised his glass. "To Diane." "She raised Sabrina right," I said. "That's the one that matters." Frank shook his head slowly. "He changed your locks. The man found a $17 million secret and led with changing your locks." I laughed. First real laugh in months. "That's the thing about men who take shortcuts," I said. "They always underestimate the distance." Sawyer Scott came looking for a fortune, and found a 63-year-old man with a replaced heart valve. 31 years of expertise. A lawyer who chose her father's oak tree over her husband's paper house. He signed the relinquishment on a Thursday. The corridor dropped on a Friday. 3 days. 3 days away from everything. Instead, he watched it from outside with nothing. I still sit in Diane's chair every morning. Coffee. The oak tree. The quiet that finally has no teeth. If you liked this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw, and family-centered stories on Sweet Family Revenge. And as always, thank you, genuinely, for being part of this family. People often ask me whether I ever think about how differently everything could have ended. The honest answer is yes, but not in the way they expect. I don't spend my mornings imagining revenge or wondering what would have happened if one signature had arrived a little later or one decision had been made differently. I think instead about how close I came to abandoning the quiet voice that kept telling me something wasn't right. Sometimes the greatest turning point in a person's life is simply choosing not to ignore their own instincts. Looking back now, I realize the oak tree was never just a tree. It became a symbol of everything that lasts longer than pride, manipulation, or carefully constructed lies. Seasons came and went. Storms bent its branches. Winter stripped away every leaf. Yet every spring, it quietly bloomed again, without asking anyone's permission. I often think people should aspire to live more like that. Strong enough to survive difficult seasons. Humble enough to begin again. Every morning, as I sit with my coffee beneath its shade, I remember my father not for the wealth he left behind, but for the values he planted long before I understood their importance. He taught me that character isn't revealed when everything is going your way. It's revealed when doing the right thing costs you something. At the time, those lessons sounded old-fashioned. Today, they feel priceless. The house itself has changed very little over the years. The floors still creak in the hallway. Morning light still pours through the kitchen windows, exactly as it always has. Birds still gather in the branches outside before sunrise. The biggest difference is invisible. The rooms no longer carry tension. They no longer feel like places where every conversation might become another argument waiting to happen. Peace has settled here so naturally that sometimes I forget what constant anxiety once felt like. Visitors often comment on how calm the house seems. They assume it's because of the garden, the old furniture, or the quiet neighborhood. I usually smile because the real reason can't be seen. Homes become peaceful when the people inside stop living in fear. That kind of peace can't be purchased, inherited, or decorated into existence. It has to be protected through honesty, boundaries, and the courage to walk away from relationships built on control instead of love. Every now and then, someone asks whether I feel sorry for the man who walked away with nothing. Compassion and accountability are not enemies. I can genuinely hope he eventually found the wisdom to become a better person, while also recognizing that every choice carries consequences. None of us escape the lives we build through our own decisions forever. Eventually, the truth catches up, quietly and without unnecessary drama. Looking back now, I don't remember the legal documents nearly as clearly as I remember the mornings that followed. Coffee growing cold while I watched sunlight move across the yard. The sound of wind through the oak branches. The extraordinary feeling of realizing that no one was waiting to manipulate, intimidate, or diminish me anymore. Freedom rarely arrives with fireworks. More often, it sounds like silence that no longer feels frightening. It feels like breathing deeply without realizing you've been holding your breath for years. If there's one lesson I hope remains after this story ends, it's this: never trade something real for something merely impressive. Paper houses can look beautiful from the outside, but the first strong storm reveals what they were built upon. The strongest lives, like the strongest trees, grow slowly. They sink their roots deep into honesty, integrity, and self-respect long before anyone notices their height. In the end, the legal victory wasn't the part that stayed with me. The inheritance wasn't either. What remained was far simpler and infinitely more valuable. Every morning I still sit in Diane's chair with a warm cup of coffee, watching the oak tree stand exactly where it has stood for decades. The world continues to rush by beyond the fence. Seasons continue to change. Life continues to surprise me in both beautiful and painful ways. But here, beneath those familiar branches, I have finally found something I once believed could never last: a quiet that asks nothing of me, fears nothing, and carries no hidden cost. And after everything that came before, I have come to understand that this quiet isn't empty at all. It is the sound of a life finally built on truth, strong enough to weather every season still to come.